Hey everyone, we want to welcome you to the Deeper Dive podcast of Hopevale Church. This is where we take the message from the weekend and we keep the conversation going during the week. I'm Dan Davis, senior pastor here of Hopevale. We're in the Great Lakes Bay region like we've been talking about for the past couple weeks in church. Today I'm joined by Paul Miller, our executive pastor. Hey Paul.
Hey, it's good to be here.
It is, and we're going to dive into the message yesterday, part 2 of our Beyond series, and talk about what it means to be sent. But you probably have a few other things on your mind.
Yeah, I
right?
always have like a lead-in question, right? So normally Kathy would be co-hosting this thing with you. I know she's traveling, visiting family,
she is,
right?
Yes.
So my wife Bobby is traveling as well. So I was sitting down yesterday to watch the Lions and the Bears, who are both on at the same time on different channels. And I got to thinking, well, there was the whole thing about, neither one of our teams is going to win. But then I got to thinking about how much easier it is to watch football on Sunday afternoon when my wife is out of town. So here's my question for you.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go there, right? Here's my question for you. When Kathy travels, how many days are you good before you're like, man, I'm ready for her to be home? I know for me, it's like 3 days. After 3 days, I'm ready for my wife to be back. So I'm just going to ask you what it is for you.
Wow. I don't know if I've ever put a number with it, but I get the vibe. I get exactly what you're saying, because the first couple days, it's definitely novel and maybe not quite Tom Cruise risky business, sliding across the floor in your underwear, but there is this sense where you're like, oh, this is good. I'm not going to pick this up right away. I'm going to eat whenever. I'm going to eat whatever. I might not make the bed,
or
things
load
like
the
that.
dishes.
Yeah. Totally. Although, for me, it's just me. I know you're still watching kids, so that's like double challenge.
Yes, I had to do homecoming this past weekend by myself, which meant photos and shopping for clothes and a lot of things that normally I wouldn't have to deal with. But we made it through. It's all good. So
I can't imagine the homecoming gig, Paul, is like at the top of your list.
No,
so
not really.
Well, way to go. Dad points for you.
Exactly.
Definitely. And I love how you just totally avoided the conversation about our football teams, because the Lions,
Doink.
66-yard field goal. Unbelievable.
It's not good. Not good.
But let's get beyond that. See what I did there?
I did. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. And so yesterday was week 2 of our 2-week series called Beyond. And, maybe we can just even talk about that, Paul, because we talked last week when Kathy was here about this strategic planning process with a spiritual emphasis. And as part of that, we were just really gripped by this whole word or idea of beyond, and you were part of those conversations, right? What does it mean to you? And because I've got a few thoughts too about just what's just enwrapped in this idea of being beyond.
Yeah, for me, it's contextual. I think about where we've been as a church, and I think I could say that like capital C church, like we've all been through the pandemic, and right? So there's all these conversations going on right now in church leadership circles about, we're coming out of the pandemic. Is it time to go back to where we've been? What has changed that's never going to change back? And all of those kind of conversations. And I'm naturally wired to look forward more than I am to look backwards. And I know we started this long-term vision process, I think it was January of 2020, like we were talking about in the podcast last week. And somewhere along the way, for me, the conversation really turned towards, where is Jesus taking us? What do we see out there? I can get really cranked up about that. And the timing of it is perfect. That's why I say context, right? The timing of it is perfect because we're coming out of the pandemic. People are coming back in person, or they're engaging online, whatever it is. But there's just this sense that what's next? What is the thing that's going to be next for us? So I believe we're in a season of looking out on the horizon and listening for what the Spirit is telling us there. For me, that partially explains why at the elder board there's such an emphasis on prayer right now, and seeking and listening and discerning what the Lord is trying to tell us more. I mean, that's always a thing, but right now, as you know, it's a really big thing for our elders, for our leaders, which I love. So it makes me excited because I trust the Lord. I trust where He's taken us, and
Right.
I can get excited about that.
Yeah, that's good. Just picking up on that and the conversations we have been having and the praying and the planning is, I think for me, the word beyond is kind of a prod in a good way that if we're not careful, it's easy to settle, and it's easy to live on, I don't know, past victories or what the Lord did versus what He is doing and what He is going to do. And I think that's really where beyond pushes us, and certainly with this idea of being called to this region and playing our part in the world, that it really is. It's like, we have this wonderful story of how God has worked in the history of our church over the past 60 some years. And there just always is going to be that tendency to go, wasn't that great? And we get to do that, but that's not the whole story.
And it was great, but that's not all
the
Lord has planned, right? Like, I love signing my emails to the church for the Great Lakes Bay region. And as we're going into the fall and more people that are new to Hopevale are coming in the doors and introducing themselves and saying, hey, I'm here, I'm checking out this church and all that kind of stuff. It just makes me realize that our church is really growing into becoming a regional church. And, I wasn't at Hopevale for the move from Shattuck up to Center in Tittabawassee, but man, it's going to be exciting to see what the next move is, right? Not necessarily geographic or like building wise, but just in where the Lord has taken us and what the emphasis is He has.
Yeah,
for us.
Definitely. And there's enough unknown and uncertainty to make us uncomfortable in a good way.
Absolutely.
Yes, which really leads to then this whole idea of being sent.
Yeah.
Last week we talked about this big beyond the horizon statement. I'm just going to read that again, and then we'll dive into it and unpack what I said yesterday. So, because you were heart and soul center in these conversations, Paul. So we see more and more people throughout the Great Lakes Bay region and beyond personally experiencing the transformative hope of Jesus. We see a church celebrating that hope whenever we gather and sharing that hope wherever Jesus sends us. And it really was kind of that last part that provided the segue or the transition into this year's emphasis based on this idea of how Jesus sent out His disciples. Again, Jesus said, this is John 20:21, peace be with you, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. Which, by the way, I didn't share this in the message yesterday because I thought it might confuse people, but the word apostle actually means sent one, the one who is sent. And isn't it interesting? So it's used in a couple different ways. It's used specifically to describe the 12 disciples who became the 12 apostles, Judas, that's another story, but but then also just in generally, right, these apostles, these messengers, these ambassadors, these leaders of Jesus. And I love it because I think when we hear the word apostles, we kind of think about, I don't know, maybe more like rulers or, authorities, but it really is the ones who are sent out. And just that whole spirit of what we saw the week before in Acts 1:8, and again repeated that we saw yesterday, John 20:21, of what it is to be sent.
Yeah, so let me follow up on that, because in my notes as I was listening to the message, I wrote that verse down, and I wrote down the obvious question that might seem painfully obvious. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. So where was Jesus sent? I mean, I kind of know, right? But I'm asking the question, and then what can we learn about our sending from Jesus' example? I think sometimes we think, well, Jesus was sent to die. So does that mean that He's sending all of us to die? Or where was He sent, and what can we learn from that?
Wow. So, wow. Okay. So there are a couple different ways I can answer that question. First, from kind of this cosmological sense, right? Jesus, the eternal Son of God, who is existing before time began with the Father, right? So there is this, well, it's our John 1:14, right? The word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. There's that sent, the one
Yeah.
full of grace and truth. So he is sent from heaven to earth, and he comes in this unexpected way, born in a Bethlehem stable. So there's that sending. And then he lives this rather obscure life until his ministry calling at age 30. And then the ministry begins. And it's interesting. This is going to get geeky, and I'm sure it's not totally where you want to go, but he talks about being sent to the lost sheep of Israel. Like there was this primary calling where he first, has said, I'm called to Israel to call them back, to call them to repentance, to call them to true faith. And then there is kind of this rejection, and you even see in some of his miracles and interactions with Gentiles, which was just unheard of, whether it's the miracle, and I'm drawing a blank, but to one of the people, he performs a miracle. It's a Gentile, and he says, I've never seen such faith in Israel. Or you think about his interaction in John 4 with the woman at the well, right, who's a Samaritan, and she comes to genuine faith in him, and the word spreads. So there is this whole thing, and he sends, before this moment, in John 20, there's the time too where he sends out his disciples 2 by 2.
Yeah.
Let me see. Let me pull that up. Yeah, in Matthew 10, and it says, I send you out like sheep among wolves.
Yeah.
Therefore, be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves.
So one of the things we can learn from Jesus' example then would be that him sending us out might cost us something relationally, like it might be to some relationships or to some people that wouldn't be our first choice kind of thing. I know that's been true of my experience, and why sometimes I'm tempted to just ignore the voice of the Spirit when I feel like
keep going with that.
Yeah. So for me, the things that I think we can learn from Jesus' example, and even just as we apply to our own lives, right? It's going to cost us something relationally. Like I said, it might, whether you're someone who feels like they're full relationally and you've got enough friends and you don't need more people in your life, or because it's people who don't feel necessarily safe or clean. I'm using really harsh words to describe that, but the best example I can give is my son Paul is going to boxing now. He has decided that he wants to box, and so I take him to this gym and drop him off, and it's really tempting to just drop him off and wait in the car or go home and come back when he needs to be picked up. But there's a whole set of people there that maybe I feel like the Spirit is going, there's probably some friendships that you could develop here. They wouldn't be people that would be my first choice to be friends with. I just don't know them. Life experience, very different. And so it's sometimes easier just to ignore that voice and stay safe. I think sometimes being sent can take time and energy that we're not necessarily ready to invest. And so those are like all the reasons why we might just go, well, thanks, no thanks, or not today, or I know I should, but, and all of those kind of things. And I think it's important for us to remember that Jesus isn't sending us to wherever it is that he wants to send us because he wants to make us miserable. It's because he has something he wants to do through us, right? And it's not like I'm going alone. I'm in and with, and the Spirit is in and with and through me in the whole thing. And so I think all of those things are kind of in the soup. So that's why when I hear the statement, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you, there's some fear and some uncertainty that comes in initially. But then when I think it through, I go, okay, God, do I want to be available to you in that way? Do I want you to use me in that way? Sometimes the answer is, yeah, probably. Sometimes the answer is yes, absolutely. And that's just kind of the mix of it for me, right? And I think for a lot of us.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think you see the realness of that with Jesus's original disciples and
yeah,
not wanting to. Again, it was awkward that they had gone through Samaria and to see the Samaritan woman. I mean, that was clearly that kind of rocked their world as Jesus was paving new ways to do that. Your boxing story is interesting to me, Paul, because that's that whole idea of something I brought up in the message yesterday, that it's maybe not a change of direction
right.
as it is a change of perception. And,
Yes.
it's, we've had conversations about this a little bit, but, so often I think part of our sending or being sent is related to age and stage of life and the circles we're in. And, certainly when we're in the thick of raising kids, a lot of our sentness centered around their activities and people we were rubbing shoulders with, but that's changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I know that I will often get that first nudge from the Spirit that kind of sometimes sounds like you should just go be friendly. Just simple thing. Okay, so perfect example. 2 days ago, I'm watching college football, and somehow one of our dogs gets out the front door, and so I go to the front door and I realize that she has run across the cul-de-sac, and there's a whole bunch of people having a party outside, and the kids are playing with our dog. So I'm standing there going, okay, well, they know that's our dog. So if I stand here long enough, I wonder if one of them will just bring the dog back. Because if I walk over there, I'm gonna have to get into a conversation. I'm gonna be over there for about a half hour, and I'm watching the football game. I don't want to get into that and everything else. But I can't walk over there and be rude. I need to walk over there and be friendly and maybe just represent or whatever in a way that I should. Right? So I have this little crisis moment with the Spirit where I'm like, what am I going to do? And of course I end up walking over there and we get into a nice little conversation and I meet a couple of my neighbors that I haven't met before, and who knows what comes from that. And they probably saw right through me. And as I was walking back with the dog, they're probably like, oh, that guy didn't want to be, whatever. But at least like taking the first step and listening and responding when a serendipitous opportunity just presents itself. And those are like the God moments where you don't know what's going to come from that. And sometimes it's just being friendly, but sometimes it's actually there's a conversation that needs to be had, or sometimes that lays the groundwork for a conversation that's going to come later, which is really what the Lord has up his sleeve, on his mind,
Well, and that's, the win is in the, I would say the win is in the response, not the result. In other words, right? The fact that you just were obedient in the moment, and however God takes that's beyond your control. So that's it. Yeah,
and that's
definitely.
that's the change in perception.
Yeah,
that may or may not lead to a change in direction, but whatever. It's just
right.
It's just realizing that there are opportunities like that the Lord gives me on a regular basis, and my availability for those things is the first step.
Yeah.
And then I have
availability.
To trust him. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. You said, so I'm going to go back to the message because you were talking about how Jesus was sent. And I had that part in the message where I mentioned those 5 things, that the way Jesus was sent, that sent in love, on mission, with good news to people in need as selfless servants. And that was it was kind of my way of trying to condense just statements Jesus had made about his own life, or what the scriptures say about him, right? In love, John 3:16, God so loved the world. On mission, I've come to seek and save the lost, with good news. Those statements at the beginning of Mark, he came and preached the good news, and to people in need, right? I've come to call not the righteous, but sinners. And then as a selfless servant, right? Yeah. He came not to be served, but to serve. And how that really gives us a model, and it's funny. I think sometimes this question comes up like, well, which of the 5 grabs you, and it was just a reminder that we are ambassadors, apostles, sent ones with good news. I mean, it really is. And I think just to see that with the life of Jesus, and then him in turn entrusting us, the church, to do that as well.
Well, and that's a perception turn again, right? Because what's the best way to say this? Hopevale has a good reputation in this community. I met a couple people yesterday in church that were there for the first time, and part of our conversation, both of them said the same thing to me, which was, I've just heard great things about this church and the people in this church. So I thought I would check it out, right? So sometimes when I'm out about in the community, doing life, doing my thing, right, I'll bump into conversations with folks where for some reason or on some level, they know that I'm connected to Hopevale. And so it's funny how that makes me feel like, stand up straight, be polite, be on your best behavior kind of thing. Okay, so that's like our local church, but then take it to the next level and go, I'm also way more importantly representing Jesus and that word ambassador that you just used, right?
Yeah.
And that should be a thing for me. It should be a motivator for me. That should be enough to tip the scales over to where I don't want people to get me. I want them to get Jesus in me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's not always my default setting or my knee-jerk reaction. And so that's part of why I love this goal of what would it be like if everybody who called Hopevale their church home knew where Jesus was sending them. I can't imagine how the Great Lakes Bay region would change if anytime somebody bumped into someone from Hopevale, whether they knew they were from Hopevale or not, but just every time that happened, what they got was Jesus in that person.
Yeah, so you were part of those conversations, right, when we were crafting that statement, for lack of a better way to say that. But this whole idea, and every part of that statement has some depth. We talked about this, everyone who calls Hopevale their church home, and that's going to launch this series next month. But, to know where Jesus is sending them, and probably we could say to whom as well, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder, talk about becoming a regional church and talk about reaching or realizing the redemptive potential, the kingdom potential that Jesus might have for us as a church. So like there's the cumulative effect of, so I feel like if I walk across the street and I'm friendly with my neighbors when they got my dog, okay, little drop, right? Small thing. They know I'm a part of Hopevale, whatever. They saw my Grace and Truth sign in my yard. If they don't know that I work there, whatever. But what if a whole bunch of those little tiny droplets were dropped all over the region, in all the different places where we live, work, play, hang out, all of those things. I would be really excited to see what Jesus could do if we were all available in that way. That's why the 1-year goal, that's why some of the initiatives that we're putting in place for this fall, that's why the series that we just completed, and the No Place Like Home series coming up starting next Sunday, which I'm super excited about. It's all kind of pointing us in a direction. Yeah.
And boy, when you were talking about thinking of just people embracing this, so I think about this rhythm of worshipers and witnesses, and at least in Saginaw, that's where I was yesterday. Phenomenal worship to get my heart and my head in a really right place. And I think about us just being revived in the Lord, and we were sent out into a world that is, I don't know, this is what it feels like to me, anxious and angry. Everyone is really either anxious or angry. And, if Jesus says to us, peace be with you, and we go out in his peace, we go out in his power, I mean, even that is just so countercultural. And if,
Yeah.
if we're living out, so you know, give the return the dog example, but there are all these little interactions, right, where peace is being brought into, spoken over, lived out among people who are anxious or angry. It's compelling. It is this salt and light dynamic.
Yeah, and it's a privilege, right? So yesterday,
Yeah.
I had 3 conversations yesterday with 3 people who were new to Hopevale. And 2 of the 3 came up and introduced themselves to me and said, I know who you are because I see the videos on Friday, which I got to stop doing those videos. But no. So the first person actually lives in southern Indiana, works up here in Saginaw. So he's up here like 2 weekends a month and has decided that he needs to find a church home for when he's up here.
Wow.
So here he is. And he's just like, hey, I think this is the place where the Lord wants me to be. And then he looks at me and he goes, is there any place where we could pray? And so we walk into the hub and we sit down and have this conversation, and he kind of shares what's been going on in his life. And I end up having the privilege of praying with him. And he says, thank you. Sent me a follow-up email this morning to thank me for that. And off he goes, right? That's one. Then I run into a person who attends another church in town and has just recently gone through a divorce. And the story there is my ex is really, really connected at our church. And it just feels awkward to me. So I'm trying to figure out where I can go on Sundays so I'm not alone. Could this be that place for me? Wham. Now I'm in that conversation, right? And then my third conversation was with a guy who's a student at SVSU who's on the football team and was like, I need to go to church while I'm here at SVSU. And a couple of my friends told me that I should check out Hopevale. So here I am. Right? So I have all 3 of these conversations, and all 3 of them have one thing in common, which is somebody, raising their hand and going, hey, I'm here. I don't want to try to do life alone. I'm wondering if Hopevale can be a place to help me figure out how Jesus fits in my life, right? And those are like in the lobby of the church on Sunday morning. So gather, send. What if those kind of conversations were happening everywhere we were out and about, every single one of us, right? In the church lobby, it's kind of like, oh yeah, hey, I walk up to one of the leaders and introduce myself and I know that I'm talking to like a Jesus person or whatever. But what if you lived in such a way, wherever it was that you were sent, that people could kind of smell that on you?
Wow.
And they come up, they would start having the conversations with you and go, I don't know what it is that you got, but I need it. And bam, now you're into relationships and conversations and opportunities that could be kingdom building, life changing for other people, and the multiplied effect of those all over. I'm sorry, I keep saying the same thing like 5 different ways in this conversation. But.
No, I think that's really good. And again, it's that availability word, Paul, that you used before. It's about this change of perception of just having just a sensitivity to the moment. See, it's so often, we're wondering if we're doing God's will or what's God's will for my life. Well, this moment before me is the will of God. This person before me is the will of God. And it may not seem spectacular or miraculous, but this is where I am in that moment.
Yeah.
To listen or to pray for or to encourage or whatever. So I love that, right?
Yeah. I always go into those kinds of opportunities a little bit nervous, a little bit unsure, and I always come out of them going, that was a privilege. Thank you, Jesus, for using me in that moment, right? To me, that's at the heart of what it means to be sent. So, okay, I'm going to channel my inner Kathy Davis and say what was on the cutting room floor from yesterday that didn't make it into the message? Is there anything specific that you would want to share with us?
Wow. Yeah. That's a great question. Paul, I think for me, as I was just kind of landing that, has to do with the way I landed the message and talking about those two guys.
Yeah.
I wrestled whether to do that or not, because on the one hand, one, it was still pretty raw for me, and I think for those who are part of those services, but I thought, here really are the examples of two guys who are part of our church who again, on the outside looking in, just rather ordinary guys. But I think I wanted to share those stories because it's like, it's all of us. It's all, there's not that. It's so easy to say, okay, here are the professionals and here's everyone else, or here are the superstars and here are the scrubs,
Right.
And I think I wanted to do that. And, what I wish I had more time to say but I didn't is, let's be clear. Rod was a single guy in his 70s, and he had a lot of discretionary time. And Kim, married to Nancy, had a lot of discretionary time too. And so I know that there were people listening. So you mentioned doing the whole homecoming routine, right? I know there are parents, and single parents who are just in the thick of it, barely surviving. And so what I didn't want people to hear is, oh my gosh, you better be going into the prisons and doing your thing. And that's, because if you're not, then, you're not measuring up. And
you got to have a video worthy story, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the point that I wanted to make, the cutting room floor, is, wherever you are in life, that's where Jesus has you, right? And what it's going to look like is going to be different than everyone else around you. Do not fall prey to the comparison trap and thinking you should be doing more, because it's kind of what you said. I do think, so as much as I said, change of direction, change of perception, I do think when our perception changes, it could lead to a change of direction, right? But let God take care of that, and he'll show up. And
that's exactly right. So stories like Rod's or Kim's, are they challenging to you or encouraging to you, or probably some mix of both?
It really is. It really is a mix of both. I think on the one hand, and again, at risk of getting morbid, I think there is a funeral. There's something that happens at funerals where it can, in a good way, take stock of your own life.
Yeah.
And go, okay, here's why I am. Where I am. I've lived these many years. I've got this many to go. Lord willing, who knows?
Yeah.
Are there things that I could do differently? I could do better. Are there things? Am I really investing my time, energy, efforts in the best way possible? So that's the challenging part. But the encouraging part, again, we don't want to throw these guys into sainthood. I mean, there are plenty of stories about both these guys as well that remind us they're just kind of normal guys, right? And had their own personality quirks and foibles and the rest. And, which tangent, but not tangent. We've talked about the Chosen online series of Jesus and the disciples before, but that's one of the things I like about that is it humanizes certainly the disciples, but even Jesus. And so that's the whole tension when you hold up examples. It's not like, oh my gosh, I could never attain that. No, this is the power of our God working in and through people, right?
Yeah.
And it really is. It's just everything that Jesus taught about the kingdom, how it works like a mustard seed, how small beginnings, incredible impact, right?
Well, and our responsibility is to be available.
Yeah.
And to respond when we hear his voice, and to take the first step and trust him with the rest of it, and as best we can get out of the way and let him live and minister through us, right?
That's so good. Yeah. Yes. And again, just this beyond this nudge of just not getting stuck or just not just stuck where we are, but stuck in the past, and celebrating yesterday's victories, because God has still so much more to do in and through us. Well, this is good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man, we could have had 3 more deeper dive
Deeper dives,
conversations about this,
definitely.
but-
Yeah. So like you said, we're going to turn the page next month, talk about what it means for Hopevale to be your church home in No Place Like Home. Looking forward to that. But again, we want to thank you for listening today. And as always, we want to invite you to join us again next time when we take a deeper dive.
Thank you for watching the Deeper Dive video podcast. To check out our full library, make sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Also, make sure to select the bell icon in order to be notified of any new content as it's posted. If you would like to give to the Lord here at Hopevale and support the ministry, you can give by visiting hopevale.org/give. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you and your family here at Hopevale Church.